Hello, everybody. I am a Hangry Table, although these days I'm feeling more like a penitent table because I nuked Pro's 80K celebration live stream by accident, and I apologize profusely for that. However,
you chose unwisely.
I chose unwisely, but we chose wisely for the movie today. We are going to be talking about things that go in the sky, things that fly around, but not so much the things themselves, but where those things in particular end up landing and resting their feet. What is that called? Yes, it's an airport, just like the movie we're going to be talking about. Lou, what do you want to... Okay, when you first suggested airport, I thought you were thinking about airplane.
Yes,
with Leslie Nielsen, and I got all excited for a moment, and I thought this is going to be great. But again, I hadn't heard about this movie.
Oh my God.
I know. I am sheltered. I am a babe in the woods, apparently. So watching it, it was a real pleasant surprise. I've got to say, it was a fun romp.
A good old fashioned soap opera in the air, basically.
And on the ground.
Yes, but you always like to run the numbers. Imagine this for a minute. $10 million to make it. It made $128 million.
I'm surprised that number was so low. This feels like it was a larger film.
In 1970.
Yeah, that's the thing, is we're talking about 50 years on now.
Yeah.
And this is the movie that became Universal's top movie of all time, the previous one being Spartacus. And to show you how movies in their style and everything else changed, 5-6 years later, it was superseded in that category by Jaws. So
wow. Well,
of course, part of that is Lorn, that these big stars didn't make what we now consider to be big star money in these things. I mean, they made big money for the time, but nobody would make $20 million a picture the way that several people in this movie would have if their careers had blossomed many years later.
So you're saying they should have unionized?
I'm tired of unions. I've been doing so many of these streams about the IA contract over the last few days that I'm unioned out. So I'll pass on that one.
Why don't we check in?
Okay.
Stow our baggage.
So the airport in question is the fictional Lincoln Airport, which is theoretically outside of Chicago, but not O'Hare. And it's all about snow. And of course, they went and shot this at Minneapolis St. Paul's Airport, figuring, well, we'll have snow. It's winter. It didn't snow. They had to bring in plastic snow. But anyway, Burt Lancaster.
Snow, I have to say, sorry, go on.
No, I'm just going to say Burt Lancaster is the noble head of the airport, who is fighting with neighbors who are angry about noise and board members who are angry about neighbors and how they'll vote. And of course, seems like everybody in this movie is having an affair because his wife doesn't understand him and the lady who helps him at the airport does. And hey, we've all been there and done that, haven't we? Anyway, an airplane comes in. This is the era, remember, of not giant planes. They've made 3 more sequels about 747s and Concords. This is the noble, stalwart, original, when it came out, the chariot of jet aircraft, the 707. And one of them coming in on this snowy runway decides to take a little shortcut turn and misses and gets stuck in the runway with its tail sticking out into the long runway. That means that long runway, until they can get that plane out of there, is out of commission and they have to use the other one. The other one causes more noise for the neighbors, but it also causes a problem because it's shorter. It is much shorter. And of course, airplanes in general, and particularly those that have a problem, would like a long running room to get up and get down. Meanwhile, we are dealing with the great #1 flight out of this mythical airline to Rome from Lincoln, on which are a strange assortment of interesting passengers. We've got obviously the captain, but we've got two captains because in the airline business, as I know, as someone who has relatives who are pilots, they have what they call a check ride every so often, where even the most experienced have to have another senior captain ride along with them just to kind of give them a report card. So we have Barry Nelson as the captain and Dean Martin as the check ride super duper captain. And you might think, wait a minute, you put the drunk in charge of checking the other guy? But no. First of all, as we know, most of Dean's so-called drinking is an act. But beyond that, the reason I really wanted to renew our interest in this movie, and it's a fun movie all the way around, he's so darn good in this. He is so sincere, and he's funny when he's funny, and he's angry when he's angry, that when Dean Martin put his mind to it, as he did in some Westerns and some other movies, when he wasn't doing Matt Helm, for example, or The Roasts or all the rest of that stuff, he was a damn good actor. And in this, I think much so.
A little bloated, though, wouldn't you say, Lou?
Oh, well, I don't know. I don't know. But meanwhile, he, of course, is also cheating on his wife with lovely stewardess, then relatively unknown actress, Jacqueline Bisset. And it turns out, he finds out just before they're going to take off, she's pregnant. And in that day and age, to have a movie, A, deal with that reality, and B, deal with people deciding they want to keep the baby versus not, that was kind of a little edgy. Then we have, of course, George Kennedy. Now, George Kennedy plays this guy named Joe Petroni, and he is the only one who is in all four of the airport movies, going from being the #1 mechanic ground crew guy to being a pilot as the series goes on. But in this one, he's the guy trying to get the stuck airplane out of being stalled and stuck without bringing in bulldozers that'll tear it to pieces.
He's the guy. He's the guy with the cigar in the image I put up. And Lou, sorry, I think you weren't watching the screen because I was pulling a bit of a gag on you.
Oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't. I was going
when I was saying that he was a little bit bloated there.
Yeah, well, okay. Sorry, I apologize for being.
That's okay.
But
don't call me sorry.
What can I say? Interesting. That movie is based on a prior airplane novel by the same guy who wrote this one, Arthur Haley, but that one is called Runway 08, I think. Anyway, in that one, everybody gets food poisoning and hilarity ensues. We also have Helen Hayes as this charming, cute little old lady who stows away, who travels all over the world by various methods of sneaking on the plane. And so she sneaks on the plane. We also have a guy named Guerrero, who is a construction demolition guy who is very down on his luck, who feels he's betrayed his wife, Maureen Stapleton, and all of his future, and has decided to end it all by getting on the plane and blowing it up and collecting insurance for his family. But he is noticed as being a little strange by Lloyd Nolan, veteran actor who plays a customs officer. And we got various and sundry other people involved in the story, too. The movie got Helen Hayes an Academy Award and was nominated for 9 other awards: Best Picture, Best Cinematography, Best Costume Design for Edith Head. And anyway, we follow up on all those stories, and everybody gets on the plane, and we all take off. And they try to get this guy to not blow up the airplane, but when a idiot passenger, of which there are many, he panics, goes into the restroom, and blows up his bomb. Now, of course, this is in the days of no TSA and no screenings at the gate, so he's got a briefcase with a bomb in it. That decompresses the airplane, which, of course, causes chaos. That injures the stewardess who is pregnant. That gives them a problem because the only runway they can get to that they're really sure they can maybe get this injured airplane down on is the one with the airplane blocking it. And so the whole contest is between time, ability to keep flying, and getting that plane out. And spoiler alert, they do, we land, etc. Those of you who see the thumbnail that I made for this show, you will know where that phrase on it comes from, because when George Kennedy, along with a young aide, gets in the cockpit of the stalled plane on the ground and guns it way beyond what the engines are supposed to be able to take and blows it out, the kid says, "My God, Mr. Petroni, the manual says that can't work." And he looks at him and says, "That's what I love about the 707, kid. It can do everything but read." So
Yeah.
there you go. And there's Van Heflin in that picture as Dio Guerrero. Anyway, a big schmaltzy score, some very, very technically accurate photography of air traffic controllers and flight personnel, and a kind of a fun inside look into the operations of a major airport made this thing a hit. Now, the critics hated it.
Before we jump into that, I would just clarify the operation of an airport pre 9/11.
Well, sure.
Yeah.
Sure, obviously.
But go on. The critics.
The critics hated it. The audience didn't care. And this thing did business like gangbusters. I mean, geez. It was, let's see, someplace here, something about, yeah. Oh, well, that's not it. Opening week at Radio City Music Hall, it came in 7th with $250,000 roughly. It moved to more cities in the third week. Remember, in those days, they didn't release anything in 4,000 screens all across the country. It kind of worked its way out into the hinterlands. And it stayed at #1 in the country in the second week, came back to #1 in the 8th week. 3 weeks later, it got back to #1 again. After 12 weeks, it had grossed $9.5 million, including $2.6 million just at Radio City Music Hall. Got to the top spot in its 17th and its 19th week. So by the end of the year, it was the highest film of the year with theatrical rentals, money back to the studio, not box office, of $37.7 million. And Universal claimed it was the highest grossing film without a roadshow release of all time. And it made a bunch of money.
Yeah.
All the critics, like I say, said, well, it's glossy, it's slick, but it's the old standby. It's the old soap opera. And sure, it was. And it ushered in an entire panoply of so-called disaster movies. This is where all of that came from. And it was a big deal.
I mean, it was glossy and slick, but I didn't think it was particularly over exaggerated in a lot of things. Like the impression that I got when I was watching this was that, boy, they seem to be taking, a lot of the technical aspects of this quite seriously.
They did.
Yeah. And it didn't seem like a Bruckheimer Armageddon movie with, miners on space shuttles blowing up in ash. Like, it seemed as if this was, apart from the guy who, smuggled the bomb onto the plane, this felt like it could have been based on a real story almost. Like, the stowaway aspect, certainly I'm sure the private lives of the pilot and the airport manager. Like, whoever thinks to make a movie about an airport manager?
Yeah, that's true. Or that a big star like Burt Lancaster, who, by the way, said it was a piece of junk when he made it, would take a part like that. Usually that he'd be only the captains would be the heroes, not the airport manager. What's interesting when you talk about how overblown or not it is, which I agree it isn't, the problem they had with the sequels is, what do we do for an encore? So what did they do? They had one with a 747 where Jimmy Stewart is a rich art collector and is moving all of his art collection to his new Florida home, which is going to turn into a museum. And bad guys who want to steal the art want to crash the plane in the water near an island where they can open it up and steal the art. And instead, it goes wrong. And Jack Lemmon is the captain. And then they got into even bigger messes of industrial sabotage and industrial, espionage on various planes and parts. And then the last one was the Concorde, of course. And they don't get better. They get worse. And the reason I know that is, and the reason I watched this again is because I saw an ad on Amazon for a 4-video box, and they called it the Terminal Collection.
Oh, no.
Anyway, that's what it is. What do we think?
I mean, again, I would say that this was a movie which, frankly, on paper, I'm not sure could have really worked. Like, it's like deciding to make an action film about an IRS auditor or something, right? Again, the premise of wrapping a movie around an airport manager on first blush just seems to be one which doesn't, like, you kind of question, like, how does this even work? And then the movie brilliantly shows us all of the craziness that can happen in an airport within the span of, I think it was 24 hours that this movie took place in. You're
Pretty
dealing
much, yeah.
with everything from the most minor administrative matters to stowaways on airplanes, to, you know, possible tragedies in like potential like crashes of airplanes, snowstorms, and these are things, smuggling, and these are things that I guess you know about on an intellectual level, but to then see it all play out in real time, it drives home the emotional impact. Like, not only are these tough jobs, but my gosh, the stories these people in real life may have, I bet they're twice as exciting as what we saw on the screen in this film.
Lorn, what do you think?
I really enjoyed it. You had mentioned the score, and that was the first thing that I noticed. It is a classic orchestral score, and it's beautiful. The music in this is great. The cinematography is great. I loved seeing something you don't see that much anymore, and that's split screen, wipes, dissolves, multiple panels for conversations. I thought that was all really slick.
Yeah, I forgot about that point, that the way they inset, for example, the air traffic controllers into the gap between the pilots in the cockpit so that it all hangs together rather than cutting. Very smart.
Very cool. Also, you didn't mention that the ride-along pilot who's doing the evaluation, played by Dean Martin, and the airport manager, Burt Lancaster, they're brothers-in-law and kind of at odds with each other.
Right.
And that adds an additional layer of tension to the whole story.
Yeah, it's really tight storytelling first, and then you overlay this whole, you know, when we get on a plane, we get on and we go, and we don't think about all the people behind the scenes that are making it happen.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to express. Yeah.
It is very soap opera-ish, but it's in a good way. It's I've mentioned to you before, I used to have a friend who was an airline pilot who was a pilot kind of in this era. And from what he's told me, yeah, it really was kind of that insane. There's all kinds of wild things that go on with pilots and stewardesses. And
you also have to remember that this is 1970. So you're basically 25 years or 20 years after World War II. So a lot of these guys, the senior pilots, were all former combat pilots. A lot of bomber pilots and transport pilots got into the airlines. So, you know, they came from a wilder era, let's say. And certainly the marital attitudes of that era were not in the open. They were secret, but they certainly got involved. And I remember on the lot at Universal, they built this perfect replica, of course, of the inside of the 707, which a lot of the movie takes place in that passenger compartment.
Yeah.
And eventually they added in the same, it wasn't in a real soundstage. It was like in a long shed, basically a long metal shed. And then they added to it a whole section that was a 747. And they called it, you know, all the stages are numbered. They called it Stage 747. And I think at one time the tram tour used to actually drive through it. And that was there for a long time. And because they had that set, any of the myriad of TV shows that were made at Universal at that time, if anybody was flying from here to there, they wrote in a scene on the plane because they had it there, sitting, waiting, lit, ready to go. So it got a lot of visibility. And they amortized that set over all of those productions, and basically it was free. It's just, I think it is a perfect little movie blown up to be a big movie perfectly. And the score and the style and the camera work is all part of it. And also somebody in it who I don't think ever got the star attention that she probably deserved is Jean Seberg, who had a kind of a stormy background that I won't bother everybody with. You can look it up. But she's awfully good as this pressed upon but professional woman who basically handles customer relations for the airline and deals with Burt, deals with the issue, and of course deals with Ada Quonset, the stowaway, Helen Hayes, who won an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress for this.
So one of the things that stuck out to me in this film were the dual messages of, I don't even know how to put this into words, divorce / infidelity / happiness in marriage, because you had both main characters experiencing, I guess, the opposite ends of the breakdowns of a marriage. Burt Lancaster, obviously, because of his job, he was not able to sort of really attend to the needs of his wife, and she ended up starting to cheat on him, and his marriage was basically collapsing in real time around him while he was dealing with just some of the most chaotic scenes imaginable at the work that he was, like, at the airport that he was at. And it was basically, if he had, I suppose, put his family first, a lot of people would be dead, which is...
Well, there are people in high stress, high obligation jobs who for some reason have spouses who don't get it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's, to me, for example, Dana Winter, who's Lancaster's wife, is this society dame and wants him showing up at all these fancy soirees. And she says, well, I told you about this 6 weeks ago. And he says, 6 weeks ago, I didn't have the storm of the century happening. Yeah. It in a way, their spouses, and I'm not blaming them for the infidelity of the men, but their spouses are as unrealistic about the jobs they have, being every day 9 to 5, they'll show up at home on time jobs, as the people clamoring about noise at the airport are, who bought houses on the flight path and suddenly, oh my goodness, there's airplanes taking off here. I'm mad. So
it's true. And then Dean's character, who is the pilot, who is the brother-in-law of Lancaster's, he starts off, you kind of feel like he's starting off as a little bit of a cad, because he right out of the gate, he's getting into arguments with the airport manager, with Lancaster, and they're obviously at odds with each other, and he's kind of not picking on him, but certainly you can tell that they're not friends. His sister / the wife is saying, oh, just be nice and go easy on them and so on, and try to act as a bit of a peacemaker. But you do start off on the negative foot with the guy, and that continues on when you see him being dropped off at the airport by his wife and immediately getting back out into a taxi to go and visit that lovely flight attendant there. And so not only do you have this picture of him at the beginning as just a combative jerk, but also a two-timer. But then, throughout the movie, he kind of redeems himself in a way, wouldn't you say?
Yes, very much so. Thinking about it now, it's like the airport versus the airlines or the pilots is kind of like the cattlemen versus the sheepmen in the old Westerns. They both want to achieve the goal that they're going for, but each one's looking at it only from their own side. And of course, they think their side's right and the other side's wrong.
And the redemption part of Martin's character kind of comes near the end when, as I sort of throw up on the screen here, he's trying to talk down the bomber and basically say, you know, stop this. And probably him being in a very human, heroic position, which is a complete contrast to how you were kind of seeing him at the beginning of the film. And so it felt very nuanced in the sense that none of these characters are really great characters in the sense of, you know, pure morally right and so on and so forth. Like, they're human. They've got their flaws. They've got their skeletons in the closet. They've got the devils that they're wrestling with. They've got their mixed up entanglements and so on and so forth. But when push comes to shove, they rise to the occasion.
And by the way, that's not easy to shoehorn into an action.
Yeah. Yes. It's remarkable for a film of that time.
And not have it feel shoehorned, you know?
Not have it feel shoehorned. Exactly. Like, I would almost call it progressiveness without the wokeness.
I mean, this is 137 minutes. There's a lot going on in that. There's a lot going on.
Sorry, Lorn, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I wondered if we could talk about Van Heflin a little bit. Just because I'm going to have to lean on you a little bit here, Lou, because I know him mostly from 3:10 to Yuma.
Right.
Would have been
the original.
Many years before. I was a little surprised to see him in this one because there's such a long gap between those two movies. He was older, and I was a little surprised. I was expecting to see him, Van Heflin from the 50s. And the thing that struck me, though, is that in both of those movies, there's a nervousness about him, a quality that calls attention to him because he has these eyes that look constantly worried, and he's a little bit shaky. And I thought that he was perfect for this part. And you felt awful for the guy because when they give you his history, he had been an explosives guy in the war. And he basically had PTSD, and he ended up in a mental hospital to try and get better. But his career after the war was demolitions, and he's coming out of that with a hot temper. And so he can't keep a job, and he's beyond destitute, he and his wife, and she loves him, but she's scared to death because they have nothing left, and he desperately needs to hold a job. And so he's claiming he's got this job out in Milwaukee, but in actuality, he's hawked her mother's wedding ring to buy this ticket on a plane to Rome, and then he's going to buy this insurance policy to go to his wife because he's resigned himself. He knows there's nothing left for him in his life. He can't do anything except try to make it right by her, and so that's why he's on this plane trying to blow it up.
Yeah, and he's so pathetic and so sad. And you know, he's gonna kill everybody when he kills himself. You want to hate him, but you can't somehow, you know. It's a very, very sensitive performance.
And the moment he realizes when Martin is basically saying, like, look, everyone knows, like, the insurance company knows your policy's kaput. There's no point in doing this anymore. Like, just to stop and think. And you can just see, like, his world basically just comes crashing down at that point.
And I will say, I hadn't seen this movie before. And when he actually did blow himself up, I was completely shocked. My mouth dropped on the couch because I assumed the whole drama of this movie was going to be talking him down for the rest of the movie. And then they blew a hole in the side of the plane. And that really did match up the drama for me.
And
I wasn't
expecting that. This was his last feature film. Oh? He had a heart attack 6 months later or a year later.
Oh, wow.
He made a couple of TV things after that. But interesting actor.
Well, he went out with a bang.
But you know, it's a more complicated character than it looks like. It's not a mad bomber, you know. It's not an over-the-top show. It's a down inside himself so deep he can't find his way out show. And, of course, complemented by Maureen Stapleton, who is so wonderful as his wife and so pathetic at the end when she's waiting for people to get off the plane and he's not coming.
But going back to the point you were addressing earlier, though, Lou, about the fact that these are people who are in high stakes, high tension jobs with spouses who don't really appreciate that. I would say the only one who had a spouse that appreciated it was this guy right here up on the screen,
George Kennedy.
George Kennedy. And the poor guy had gotten a babysitter and was ready to have a night of alone time with his wife, and he gets the call saying, "We got this 707 stuck in the snow. You got to come and get her out." And he's like, "Oh man," but like his wife was disappointed.
And by the way, he's the only character that's in all four of the movies, and they ruin his character by the fourth movie. He goes from being he's always a good guy. He's always competent, all of that. By the fourth movie, the one with the Concorde, they're in Paris, and Alain Delon is the captain who's friendly with him and co-piloting with him. And he's divorced and lonely. And Alain Delon says, "I know this girl. Do you want to go out for a foursome tonight?" And they go out, and the woman is very nice to him, and two of them wind up together. And afterwards, in the cockpit the next day, Delon says, "So how was your evening?" And he says, "Fantastic." And Delon says, "It should be for what I paid for her."
Oh, jeez.
And I'm going, "No, you don't do that to Joe Petroni. He's a good guy. And what? You fooled him into thinking this woman actually liked him by paying her $2,500 or something." It just made me so angry at them for abusing the character.
They Jake Skywalkered him.
Yeah, well, there you go.
And George Kennedy is fun in everything that he turns up in. He's always a solid actor, and you're always kind of rooting for him.
Well, by the way, he had quite a military career. He served under Patton. He won, I think, a Silver Star or two. And then after the war was over, he stayed in the Army for 16 years. In Armed Forces Radio and TV is how he got into acting. And when he said when he got out and he went to Hollywood, he was a big guy, and they had all these big heroes on TV, like Clint Eastwood and Matt Dillon and all. He wound up playing the bad guy that the good guy beats up over and over and over again. And he said, that was my entire career for a long time until they realized I could be a nice guy too. And then everything turned around. So
I always think of him from The Naked Gun,
Yeah.
he's so good as a comedic actor too. And I thought he was always hilarious in those.
But again, because everything about the Naked Gun movies, everything about the Airplane is about straight people playing it straight and it being funny because they're doing it. If any of them ever cracked wise to the gag, supposedly when they showed Peter Graves the original script, he was horrified, that he would play basically a child molester. But then when they explained it to him, and it changed everything around for all these guys.
It's a shame. It's a shame Kennedy wasn't ever in the Airplane movies.
Yeah, well, he got plenty of work in the other ones.
And he ended up with Leslie Nielsen. So
right.
Anyway. Well, guys, Lorn, I gotta ask you, what would you say was one of the highlights of this film for you and one of the lowlights?
Well, the highlight, I think, was when Van Heflin actually set off the bomb, because normally, these things have a trajectory, and I'm pretty good usually at predicting what's going to happen. I didn't see that happening, and I probably should have, because it's a disaster movie. But I sort of figured that it was going to be talking the guy down, and I was enthralled after that. It's like that they properly ramped the tension, and you feel it the entire way through, and so that made me really happy. I don't think there's much really that I disliked about it. I think the Mrs. Quonset gag gets a little stale by the end of the movie.
Yeah.
But other than that, I think that's the only real negative I think I can point to. I enjoyed this one quite a bit.
How about you, Lou?
Well, I think you're right about the Mrs. Quonset gag, and I think any lesser actress, we would have gotten fed up with her a long time before. Yep. Because it's a movie that deals in moralities and about all the marital infidelities and whatever. If she wasn't as good as she was in this, we would have said, come on, she's a crook, to heck with her. But we didn't. And that shows the quality of the work and writing and directing and all that too. To me, as I've said, I think the performances, certainly by Burt and by Dean, And especially what holds this whole thing together from the first moment to the last is that brilliant score. It knows. And by the way, there was a quote unquote love theme from Airport that hit the charts and made money and all that. That's not all tension and action and whatever. And the sad theme for Guerrero and his wife. The music is the spine of this movie, and worth it for that alone. What about you, Dick?
Well, so like Lorn, I was really surprised when they actually blew out the side of the airplane. I was not expecting that. You felt as if you were on a certain trajectory, pun intended, with Martin kind of talking him down and whatnot. And it was almost kind of one of those points where it was kind of late at night and I was watching this film and I'm like, okay, so now they're going to talk him down and they're going to blah, blah, blah. And then like blam, and you're like, oh my gosh. But I more than that though, I think one of the things that I really liked, and I mentioned this at the beginning, is just it was a really smart and inventive way of taking what otherwise people might think of as a boring premise and creating a really phenomenal story out of it. Again, the story of a day in the life of a particularly rough day in the life of an airport manager. But it just goes to show you that the inspiration is there around us, no matter what we do in our careers, what sort of jobs we have, what daily lives we have. There are stories out there that can be plucked from everything. And so it felt almost a bit like an everyman movie in a way, in the sense that we all have our own little glories within our own lives and our worlds. Maybe I'm waxing a bit too poetic here, but I really appreciated that. I thought that was really unique and inventive and genuine, I think would be the word I would use. Now, the one thing I wasn't too much of a fan on, but this is mostly colored by the last year that we've had, is that good gravy. This could have been a real Boeing commercial. I mean, the amount of times that Kennedy's like, wow, that's how the Boeing 707 is put together. She's best thing since sliced bread, and going on and on and on about Boeing. And I just, kept thinking to myself, like, my gosh, how they've fallen.
Well, yeah, I mean, but for the longest time, they were the gold standard.
Yeah,
by far. And especially with pilots, by the way, because Boeing had all the automation, but you controlled it rather than it telling you what to do, which the Airbus planes do, according to my pilots. But you're right. It was this, you could have taken a steel mill or a movie studio, which is done before, and said, let's look at all the people and even look at this picture. This woman who plays the lady selling him the insurance policy. That's all she does all day, but that's her job. And we didn't think about that she is a person with a wife or a husband and a kid and whatever. Everybody in this movie is a professional at what they do. And we get to peek behind the curtain and see all the gears that make our jump on a plane and go work, which is just great and gives a cohesiveness to the movie, I think.
And one of my favorites of those is we were talking about how they were being technically accurate up in the flight tower, and showing the guts of how that works. One of my favorites was the security call out, where they have an agreed upon name that they'll call and give instructions to your party that is code language for the security team to go into action without panicking all the people on the floor. Right.
And that they thought ahead about that panic issue, because that's certainly part of what happens with the bomb on the plane. When Dean Martin finally mentions that there's a bomb, that's when everybody starts to go crazy. Yeah. And the way they tried to stage the abuse of Mrs. Quonset by the stewardess to get the bomb away from him. And then somebody stands up for that's personal property. You can't take his briefcase away, and grabs it away.
And that's another tension moment when they're shaking that case around.
Oh yeah, exactly.
I felt my heart leap up into my throat. And that's how you know the movie's got its hooks in you. When it actually does make you feel that tension, That's glorious. And,
Yep.
and the movie took me by surprise a couple of times. That way.
Yeah, well, like I say, I saw this ad for the 4 movies, and I thought, oh God, I haven't seen that in a million years. I'll watch it again, and just sat there blown away by how damn good it is after all these years. And as far as explosive decompression, I was just thinking when you were talking about that actually happening in this movie, I think the last and only movie where they actually showed that before this was when Goldfinger got sucked out of the window in 1964. But there you actually saw it. Here you didn't have to see all that to understand that they were in trouble. And it's off. And then those shots of that ceiling crack starting to widen and wiggle and widen and wiggle. And you're thinking, God, is the whole damn tail going to fall off? From which it doesn't matter how good the runway is or whether it's cleared. We ain't walking away. So, and even the little terms of art. The fire trucks and everything, and the snow clearing thing, they call them the conga line. Haley was famous for researching stuff. He did a book about a hospital, and he got the real stuff into his stories, and they're in this script. Anyway, it's a glorious trip to not that far back in our past, but certainly a great character grouping in a place that really isn't the same anymore, unfortunately.
Well, that was a really fascinating film. It was a really great film to talk about. It was enjoyable. It was kind of whimsical in the sense that even with all the chaos, I'd probably take the airport experience that they had back then over the airport experience we have in these days.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And I mean, they wouldn't even be able to make the premise of this film anymore these days, that's for sure. But on that note, gentlemen, it was a pleasure. It was fun talking with you guys about this today. Audience, if you enjoyed this, please let us know. Give us your comments. Give us your feedback down below. We would love to hear from you. If you have suggestions for new movies in the future, we would also love to hear those, no matter what they may be. And as a little bit of a treat for what's going to be coming next, well, we're going to be talking about, some guys by the name of Alvarez and Kelly or something. I don't know.
That Irish senor.
Oui. I mean, top of the morning.
Bill Holden, Richard Widmark, the Civil War, Janice Rule, and a whole lot of beeves. That'll be fun.
That will be fun.
And a great theme song.
Well, I haven't seen that one, so I'm looking forward to that.
Oh, the big beef I have, you should pardon the pun, with all of this YouTube stuff is that we can't play the music from these things because it's so good. But copyright being what it is, that's life if you want to stay funded. And we do. So,
yes, we wish you all happy travels to whatever airport you may be going to, and we will see you again next week.
We hope you enjoyed that special presentation of The Genre Guys here on 23PO. Be sure to subscribe to this channel for more content like it. And if you want to enjoy every episode of The Genre Guys as soon as they are released, be sure to become a member at WW Pro's YouTube channel. What were your thoughts on this amazing film? Let us know in the comments below, and thank you so much for watching. T3PO. Please comment, like, and share this video, and don't forget to subscribe to That Park Place Podcasts Online, your source for exclusive content and highlights from WDW Pro, The Pro Show, and That Park Place for all the news that should be fun.